Chansky, call the roll.
Ball. Jensen. Maroney.
Present.
Scott. Zierden.
Present. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. Can I get an approval or amendment of the agenda?
I'll approve the agenda as written.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to the open forum. If anyone would like to come up, state your name and address.
Bill Toft, 31877 Green Scene Drive, Breezy Point. My main question I have, are we going to be able to speak, is to the public going to be able to speak on the cannabis, the proposal for the architect for the new city hall, the special event permit in the Bushman Road update? Are we going to be able to speak on that? When you guys discuss that?
We did not plan on having people speak on it. We are discussing it today as well. This is the
Okay.
first time
Then-
that we're,
All right, then I'll just say what I was going to say then in those
Yeah, go ahead.
moments. Okay. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm glad you folks are taking a look at the cannabis issue. I think that, Bill Bennett, the former drug czar, said there's more people under treatment for cannabis than there is in all the other drugs combined. So I think it's potentially going to be a huge issue. My question I would have, I guess, is how are we going to enforce that? I've got customers that are police officers in the Twin Cities, and they have the utmost respect for our police department. They say it's the best in northern Minnesota. So this, what I'm about to say, is not a cut on them at all. I have, the last 2 weekends, I have collected the alcoholic empties that are in one garbage can at the disc golf course, and they're filled in that bin there, which I'd be glad to show you. I did show the chief earlier what was in that container. Again, we have an ordinance, and there's no enforcement of that. And so I have a huge issue with how all this is going to be enforced. It's nice to have ordinances and laws, but then you got to hire people, and again, it results in an extra cost to the taxpayer. I've said this before, and I'm sorry I'm going to repeat this. The former Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Northern Minnesota chief, I told him what was going on here, and I'm going to quote him right now. He said, "It's a quality of life issue," and this is regards to the parking lot. If not regulated, and marijuana and alcohol and all that, if you're not regulating, you're going to have, of course, increased traffic, speeders, noise, late night partying, vandalism, littering, and strangers coming into your house or into your neighborhood. And this is evidenced by what's going on down. He referenced Lum Park and the Whipple Beach area as examples of this. So I guess my whole point in all this is that I think we need a smallest parking lot as possible over there to negate the negative aspects that's being brought under our former peaceful neighborhoods. These decisions that you all make result in more infrastructure on top of more infrastructure. You're going to have to hire more public works people, more police officers, and it creates more tax to us having to pay in the form of our property taxes. Mine have doubled in 8 years, and I've talked to other folks around here that have more than doubled. I hope you take that into consideration tonight when you're discussing all of these issues. Thank you.
can I ask you a question before you leave?
Yes.
I've asked this actually of a couple residents. Hiring more police and public works, how is that going to help enforce it? So, because my question always is, if there is a problem, right, how do we solve it? How do you actually?
I got a problem. I'll show you the
No,
bin
no,
right
no, no,
now.
no.
That's a problem.
No. I'm asking, what is your solution?
Okay.
From an enforcement standpoint? Because as of right now, if you call Chief Sandell or any of the officers, they will come.
They will, but I'm sure they have bigger issues to deal with than walking down through the disc golf course. I do have a solution. My solution would be that there's an intern program down at the Brainerd Community College. Get some of these interns to come down and walk through in the weekends and issue misdemeanor tickets to these people drinking alcohol, and heaven knows what else is going to be happening down there. I was playing golf last week, and a group behind me was already lighting up marijuana cigarettes. I mean, this is here, people, and we need to deal with it. This is all put in the largest neighborhood in Breezy Point. That would be my solution. I
No,
mean,
and thank you. I honestly appreciate that because I think that that's the biggest thing that we need as a council are people to come and say, here's some ideas on how to do it, instead of just asking us to kind of come up with all the solutions. So I do appreciate
You
it.
can deputize me also. I'll go down there.
Well-
Give me a pad. I'll go down there.
I do appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bill, I have one question too.
Yes.
In regards to the size of the parking lot.
Yes.
Okay, they're proposing to cut it in half. That was the recommendation from planning and zoning.
Right.
So if, again, if we did make it even smaller than that, people can park on the street. So do you also propose banning the parking surrounding areas on the streets?
In all honesty, I heard that they were talking about bringing it down to 60 cars, and I don't want to offend anybody, but in the past, when something's been talked about here, usually the worst-case scenario for us that want it smaller occurs. So I was assuming that you were going to keep it the same size as it was tonight, and so I was making a case for shrinking it down to a reasonable degree, in my opinion. I mean, there's nobody living on White Overlook in that direct area, so if they have to park in the street for overflow, as a resident in that other side of that, I wouldn't have a problem. And I have grandkids that live on White Overlook down the street, which I drive down to see them. I would not have a problem with that personally.
Because I would expect to get pushback from residents, parking on the streets. I know now across from it, yes, they're vacant lots, but, in the near future, I can't predict when there'll be homes, but I just had the question, on the off-street parking specifically.
Right.
And
Okay, thank
it
you.
is part of it to shrink it down, actually. That's a part of the discussion tonight, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, open forum is closed. Just Tad or Kurt? They're not here?
Madam Mayor, I don't see anyone here. Superintendent Stumpf for Tad Erickson with Region 5, so I suggest we would move on, and then I'll look at rescheduling with them for a future meeting.
Okay. All right, so moving on to the consent agenda. Do I have an approval?
So moved.
Second?
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. New business. Here we are. Cannabis. Mr. Shansky?
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we are here to kind of kick off our discussion on cannabis. I think as most people know, as of August 1st, cannabis was legalized in Minnesota for recreational use, including possession and growing your personal plants. However, when it comes to the retail side, the state statute, the law that was passed, creates a brand new Minnesota Office of Cannabis Management, or I'll just refer to it from here, OCM. So that's a brand new division with the Department of Health that is being created and staffed, and to my knowledge, they haven't actually even started even hiring for it yet. So they're still in the infant stages. What the law that was passed that legalized cannabis, when it came to the retail side of it, it pretty much said it gave some broad restrictions, but then left a lot of rulemaking by the commissioner being Commissioner of Health, and ultimately the OCM through the commissioner. So there's a lot of rulemaking on the retail side that'll get made in 2024 once the OCM is up and running, and they don't really anticipate starting the retail side of cannabis until 2025. A little background, just emphasis on what the retail side will look like. What will happen is once they're up and running, a entity that wants to sell cannabis will have to apply through the OCM for that. Once the OCM approves that, they will then inform the city saying, we've given them the okay, you can go ahead now and issue your city license. Per the law that was passed, you are required per, I think it's 12,500 residents to have at least one license. So we will discuss in further, and that's where we're going to get into some of our recommendations, that Breezy Point, we will be required by state law to have available at least one marijuana retail license. But more information for that is to come. So what the new law, while the new law does allow for recreational use and possession of cannabis, there are still a couple things that are prohibited. I listed there where it's prohibited by the Clean Air Act. So for example, smoking inside of like a restaurant. You can't smoke a cigarette there, so you won't be able to smoke marijuana there. While operating motor vehicles, public or charter schools and school buses, state correctional facilities, in a location where smoke or vapor may be inhaled by a minor. That's another one we're going to be looking for the OCM to clarify what does that mean. On federal property and if you're under 21. So all of those things are still prohibited by the law. Really, when you look into the law, it really treats cannabis a lot like alcohol, is really kind of, I think, what they based it off of. It's not exactly the same, but very similar to that. What the law did leave in place is a couple things. It did leave in place the ability for municipalities and local jurisdictions to determine where cannabis can be used, with the exceptions mainly that you pretty much have to allow it on your private property. So if it's on someone's private property, their personal house, or in their house or their yard, you have to allow it there. That's one of the main areas where which you cannot touch that. Otherwise, pretty much any area that is available to the general public, and that is a very broad term, or a public space is a very broad term, is pretty much fair game for a municipality to regulate. So myself, Chief Sandell, Sergeant Garcia have kind of had an ongoing conversation of what maybe the city's first step should be, looking at what is the league putting out there. We all joined in on a webinar about 2 weeks ago to really kind of get in. A lot of the information is still outcoming, and again, a lot of rulemaking to be coming in 2025 or 2024 as the OCM gets up and running. So we kind of settled on 3 things we want to pitch to the council tonight as we're kind of recommending as initial actions as we go down this route of cannabis. The first is an ordinance regarding the use of cannabis. So we don't have anything, obviously. It wasn't legal up until about 7 days ago. So we obviously didn't need an ordinance on it, so we have nothing in place. As I mentioned, public space is a very broad term. And where we are recommending is when we refer to public space, to start off with would be looking at an ordinance that prohibits the possession of open containers and use of all forms of cannabis. This includes alcohol, smoke, vape, or edible smoke, vape, etc. on all public properties. That would include in public buildings, roads, and right-of-ways. So in that definition, we are not including obviously private businesses. If a private business wants to make that decision for themselves under what we're kind of recommending, letting them make that decision for themselves. I put all in front of you because I got this afternoon. The county administrator sent this draft ordinance to all the administrators and clerks in Crow Wing County. This is a draft ordinance that the county board will be considering tomorrow. That would be county-wide. The main difference kind of from what we're recommending to what this recommends, this covers pretty much a lot of what myself and Chief Sandell and Sergeant Garcia have discussed. It goes into a lot of the definitions, and from the ordinances we've seen that other cities have already drafted, this seems pretty common language. The one area, again, where our recommendation, again, we're only at recommendation phase, versus what this ordinance says is regarding that public place. So their ordinance that the county will be considering says a public space means any public park or trail, public street or sidewalk, okay, similar to what we're recommending. However, it adds any enclosed indoor area used by the general public, including but not limited to theaters, restaurants, bars, food establishments, places licensed to sell intoxicating liquor, wine, or malt beverages, retail businesses, gyms, common areas in buildings, public shopping areas, auditoriums, arenas, or other places of public accommodation. And it also goes on further to define public accommodation as a business refreshment, entertainment, recreation, or transportation facility of any kind whose goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations are extended, offered, sold, or otherwise made to the public. So that's where it goes a little beyond what our initial recommendation is. One of the other things, as I mentioned, kind of what is a public place, a place of accommodation. You know, they go into here, this is the really citing the new law, talks about what it excludes, again, is private residences, private property not generally accessible to the public. I'm still looking for a clear definition of what that means. And then on the premises of an establishment or event licensed to permit on-sale consumption. So if an event is licensed, it's, to have, we'll say, for example, a farmer's market, and we have issued them a license for a cannabis vendor to be there, then they're allowed to be there. So that's kind of what the county's looking at. Again, how Administrator Houle said in his email to all of us was they're bringing this exact same discussion to the county board tomorrow morning. And then if the county board chooses to proceed, they'll go into their public comment period prior to bringing an ordinance, very similar to what we would, pretty much the exact same process we would do. If you choose to take any of these actions that we're recommending, they're all ordinance amendments, we would go into the drafting phase, and then there would be public hearings on every single one of them prior to them adopting.
Clarification, if the county passes this, we cannot be more loose than this, but we can be more restrictive than this.
We
This
can be
will apply
more
to
loose
Breezy
than that.
Point.
So if you go to the back side, or actually the bottom page of page 3, jurisdiction, it says this ordinance shall be applicable within legal boundaries of Crow Wing County with the exception of cities of the first class and those cities and townships that have adopted their own ordinance establishing standards for public use of cannabis. So if we want to be, and that was something he also addressed in his email, he says he said pretty much that means if you wish to allow it, you can, and our ordinance would have no effect. So if we do nothing and the county adopts this, this is what we would do. If you want to be more loose than this, then we need to make if the county adopts this, the only way this would apply to Breezy Point unless we make an ordinance stating otherwise. So that's kind of where we are. So again, number one would be looking at making our ordinance that states where cannabis can be used. Again, we are encouraging that at a minimum, all public properties and buildings, roads, and right-of-ways. With that, I do want to actually point out one other element is that at the last Parks and Recreation Committee meeting, they did also make a recommendation to the council to, again, kind of in preparation of this, but they also did include tobacco. Chief Sandell and I have talked about this. For this case right now, we're talking about cannabis. We talked about should we include tobacco right along with it. We didn't for this reason. In what we're recommending, again, we're recommending no tobacco, not just on public places, but also including roads and right-of-ways. So that means you cannot walk your dog and smoke marijuana. Well, people actively, regularly walk their dog and smoke a cigarette, and they have forever. The other thing that's kind of maybe a little different, and Chief Sandell can, if you want to chime in too, or if I'm incorrect, let me know, is because marijuana we're kind of treating in this case like alcohol. So smoking marijuana while you're walking a dog, kind of attuned to drinking a beer while walking your dog. So we're trying to keep, in this situation, marijuana and the effects, that high is what we're trying to control. We don't want people necessarily getting high, walking the roads and the right-of-ways. So that's where we are right now. If the council wanted to look at, per the Parks and Rec Committee's recommendation of also restricting tobacco use, we would recommend either separate ordinance or maybe with this ordinance just restricting tobacco use to like public parks or public property, not right-of-ways and roads, because that would be a completely different thing than what we've allowed. I don't know of any other city that's saying you can't now smoke a cigarette on the, while you walk your dog. So, just want to put that out there. The second thing, very quickly, next two will go much faster. While it's not anticipated that the OCM will begin licensing until 2025, they do have the authority as soon as they feel like they're ready to go, they can start. So knowing that, and sometimes the state doesn't move fast, and sometimes the states will surprise you. We're recommending implementing an interim ordinance placing a moratorium on the licensure and retail sale of cannabis in the city of Breezy Point through December 31, 2024. The new state law does allow for that. The benefit of that, it gives us more time to really work through the licensing side. How many licenses do you want to issue? How do you want to issue those licenses? Kind of those questions. Also gives us some time to maybe allow the Office of Cannabis Management answer some of those licensing questions that they're going to come up over the next few months. And then finally, while the law does prohibit the use of cannabis by persons under the age of 21, the law didn't actually list any penalty. So pretty much what can happen right now is if any of our officers find someone under the age of 21 using cannabis, they can take it from them, and that's about it. So the law does allow for the city to adopt an ordinance that prohibits the use of cannabis by persons under 21, and then the violation of that ordinance would be considered a petty misdemeanor. So we are recommending creating such an ordinance that does formally prohibit in the city of Breezy Point use of cannabis by individuals under the age of 21. So to summarize, recommending 3 things. All 3 are ordinance amendments and would be separate ordinance amendments, and therefore would require a public hearing prior to adoption. The first is to restrict the use of cannabis by persons under the age of 21. Second would be to place a moratorium on the licensure and retail sale of cannabis within the city of Breezy Point through December 31, 2024. And then the last, to prohibit the use of cannabis on all public properties, roads, and right-of-ways. So with that, Madam Mayor, I'll take any questions that the council has.
The Crow Wing County ordinance for public place or place of public accommodation, isn't that covered by the Minnesota Clean Indoor Act?
The Clean Air Act, so a lot of it is, but what this ordinance would actually say is that, for example, if Billy's allows someone to smoke tobacco on their patio, they would not be allowed to allow someone to smoke cannabis on their patio.
That's what I figured, but I wanted to make sure.
Does anyone have any additional?
Just a quick question on the moratorium. If there was a reason we got sort of guidance in the interim before the end of December, or we had the licensing kind of discussions and that was figured out, in the event we had to license or wanted to license or give someone a license, could you end the moratorium earlier? Or if you set it to December 31st, 2024, are you subject to that?
No, you can end it whenever you want.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, can you clarify the first 2 recommendations? My understanding is the state law that was passed addresses both of those, where folks under 21 can't smoke, and recognizing the non-issuing of licenses until 2025.
Yeah, so what happens here, so I'll go to the first one. So again, clarifying, and Chief Sandell, if you would clarify too from an enforcement perspective. So what it says is they can't smoke under 21, but there's actually no penalty for them smoking. So I don't know if Chief Sandell, if you want to speak to the benefit of that or of making it.
Yeah, you were correct in the fact that without a penalty, all we can do is seize the marijuana. We wouldn't be able to issue a citation for doing so. If we have a city ordinance in place, then we can cite violators for doing so.
And what's the cost? Was there?
Well, our current city ordinances are all $50 to my knowledge. Potentially we could adjust that if we wanted to. But if it's, younger people, maybe the 50 is adequate.
Right. Okay.
And then going to
So the first action then, restricting use by persons under 21, is really getting to the penalty
the penalty, yes.
that would come.
Yeah. So the first one's the penalty, because right now state law says you can't,
Yeah.
but there's no penalty if you do.
Okay.
The second one, what that is going back to again, as I said, we don't anticipate them get going until 2025, but again, they can get going essentially once they feel that they're ready, they can start. And if we have someone, if they say, yep, we'll start looking at applications, and someone in Breezy Point files an application and it gets approved and then funneled to the city, now we're in a really tough spot because we've put nothing in place and we pretty much have to issue the license because we've put nothing in place on, as long as it meets the rest of state statute, we pretty much have to issue the license. So that's where, by putting the moratorium in place, we just know we have the time to discuss licensing, zoning, and all of that. How many licenses do you want to issue? The statute or the law does put a max. You can charge $1,000 for the license, and that is it. So we don't have to talk about the fee, but how many licenses you want, where you want them. Again, you have to allow. It's kind of like an adult use. You have to allow it somewhere in the city. So where do you want to allow it? All those questions. Do you want it to be, in addition to a license? Do you want it to be, interim use permit or a conditional use permit on top of that? You can have all of those. We have time to give yourself to have all of those discussions.
And you said one permit under 12,500.
Yeah, so we are required to have at least one. One of the questions that, again, we're kind of waiting to see, and I don't think it'll get answered until the OCM gets up and running, is the county also has a minimum. And so for Crow Wing County, that's 5. And the question is, if Crow Wing County as a whole hits their 5, can a city opt out? That's the kind of question that's floating out there, and really I don't, my honest opinion is they're probably going to say no, because I can see it, their argument will be, well then cities, everyone will just wait each other out. But that's a question that hasn't been answered yet because they're kind of leaving it to the OCM to answer that question.
And there's a lot of fix-it cannabis bills coming in the next legislative
There could be
session,
some
so-
fix-it, and then, but a lot of it is just how the law that was written is a lot of it. They just said all the details the OCM will figure out is pretty much what it said.
And we can extend the moratorium too if we,
I would have to confirm that with the city attorney, but the way the law says, they pretty much said you can go through December 31, 2024 would probably be the max we could go.
okay.
So that second point is really just a safety net for the city should the state start issuing licenses before
Correct.
25.
It gives us the time to really work through the issue.
Is the county ordinance an opt-in or an opt-out?
As it's written, I would call it an opt-out.
Okay.
So pretty much if we do nothing, this governs the city. You have to, if the county board adopts this, the city would have to adopt its own ordinance to essentially counteract it.
So it's better to just adopt this, but add our own safety.
Yeah, it'd be good to have our own ordinance, especially if you're looking to be, if this is exactly what you're looking for, then you could just make it easy and do whatever the county does, and then just let the county, the county determine it for you. If you want to be less restrictive in what the county does, then we're going to need our own ordinance.
And this is drafted for the county to review this?
Yes, so they're going
it's not
to, the county, yeah, so this is not official, so the county board will be discussing this draft tomorrow morning, and then they'll be deciding if they want to formally consider it for adoption.
And just to note that the action is just, you would just draft the amendments, and then on the next meeting, there'd be a public hearing on this.
Correct, so what we're looking for is kind of a go-ahead to draft the amendments, and then obviously we do all the noticing, and then there would be public hearings on each one of the amendments. Each recommendation would be its own ordinance amendment, and then there'd be a public hearing on September 5th on each one of them for the public to give their input on the proposed amendments.
So the reference to, on that last point, public properties, can you just clarify what that's?
I think our intention here is pretty much anything owned by a public entity, so the city, school districts, the state, federal property. Obviously, federal is already left out because the state had no jurisdiction over federal properties. So pretty much anything public. Primarily, we're looking at the city, but then it would also be school district properties, although schools are also already exempted. So anything that's owned by the city, so any parks, buildings owned by the city, and then any roads and right-of-ways owned by the, public roads and right-of-ways. So that would include sidewalks, trails, all of that would be encompassed in that. So
So it's
nothing,
really getting to properties that are owned by
the city,
a public entity.
correct. That's the main difference between our recommendation and the county's, is the county even goes towards those private properties that are available by the general public. We've just left those off for now.
Do you anticipate by next meeting that Crow Wing County may have passed or
I don't anticipate that they'll have passed it. What Administrator Hool,
what a public?
yeah, what Administrator Hool does, their normal process is if the county goes ahead with this, their general process is in addition to the formal public hearing that they have to hold like us, they also normally do a month-long public comment period. So if they tomorrow recommend to move forward, my guess is that they wouldn't actually consider this for adoption until probably their second meeting in September.
Okay. I would like to see staff reach out to the business owners in the community. I would like to hear their thoughts on it, as well as obviously residents, for the public hearing.
Do you need a separate motion for each one of these, or can we?
No, we can, one motion to direct us to move forward would be fine.
If I may. One other point to consider, I reached out to the county attorney a couple times today. I was unable to make contact. If the county's ordinance is suitable, it covers all of our bases, my question would be, will he prosecute those for us on our behalf? Currently, our city ordinance citations go to our city attorney, so there's additional cost for that. So that may be something we want to look at as well, whether he will prosecute those for us. Maybe he will under the county ordinance, but I don't know if he would under our own.
That's an excellent point, Brian.
So there's really kind of two options. I'll just say this when it comes to the ordinance piece. Two things we can do is kind of either put it in there like the county has it, like this, and then depending on what you hear from the public, you can choose to remove it. Or you don't put it in there, and then depending on what you hear from the public, choose to add it. So it's kind of what would you prefer easier, being able to remove that language if the business owners and the public say, no, we want to decide for ourselves, you could then just strike that language that talks about, the restaurants, bars, food establishments, etc. Or if you don't put it in there and they say they do want that in there, then you have to add it. I think it's easier to strike language than to add language.
So that's a interesting point. So what are you anticipating then if the council moves forward with setting a public hearing next month for the draft ordinances? As far as where are you getting the language from?
Mm-hmm. Chief Sandell and I will work together. I think we'll probably use the county's ordinance as our template, considering this is what they're already looking at, and it really covers pretty much everything we've talked about from definitions. Again, the only thing that's different from what we've recommended in the packet to this is the private property piece, that private property available by the public. So that's the only really difference to this. There's some stuff in here that obviously we would have to make city, anything that talks about the county or county commissioners, you have to change that to the city, but we would probably use what the counties as a template.
Anything else you guys have?
Is there a way you can draft it so you for the certain areas where we're talking about public places where you can have like an option 1, option 2, so we can see exactly how it would be worded in either case? You know, you said just strike the language, but I think, you know, in the middle of a meeting, you know, for me, that's difficult to sort of envision what.
Yeah,
how
we
it's
can
gonna
look at
word.
how we would do that. If they're an option 1, option 2, or more of, we would just highlight that language, so it'd be easier. It'd probably be easier if I just highlighted that specific language so you could see it, and then
Yeah, something.
tell us to strike the
would
highlighted
be-
portion or something like that. Yeah, we can do that.
Well, I'd move for staff to draft up amendments according to the recommendation, restricting the use of cannabis under age of 21, placing the interim use, and also bringing back an ordinance to prohibit on public properties, roads, and right-of-ways, along with reaching out to county just to see where this goes, and then to reach out to businesses.
Did you want us to include the public place language or not? The language that includes restaurants, bars, food establishments or not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify that.
And then do a second.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? My only question was, so if we get to September 5th and we have that hearing and we hear that bars and restaurants want to make their own decision, then we would then
Just strike that language.
strike that language out. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Any other discussion?
So is there, I guess, any underlying reason why the council needs to take up an ordinance at a public hearing in September as opposed to like November or?
It doesn't have to be. The only, I guess, the level of urgency of it is legal. So right now, there's nothing stopping someone from essentially sitting on our front porch and smoking a joint.
Just
And
asking.
if you wait till November, then the county might have passed
that's really
theirs, too.
that's really the only, from a retail perspective, I don't think we have any concerns from, again, as Chief Sandell said, it's still, and you said, it's still illegal under 21. They can confiscate any cannabis by someone under 21. The one thing between now and say November is just that there's nothing stopping someone from walking through a park, the disc golf course, the beach, and consuming cannabis in any form.
Yeah, I guess part of my asking was wondering if there would be some advantages now that the council's had discussions for the first time on this, those that are here, even that are not here, are aware of the conversation occurring. Would we benefit potentially by allowing just additional time for more conversation in the community to occur, gathering all that more input?
Can.
A month is maybe sufficient, but to me, I don't know.
And I will
wouldn't
say,
maybe hurt
and I
for
will
another
say,
month.
so we can do it, if we move forward per Councilman Maroney's recommendation, you get to September 5th, you hold the public hearing, you don't have to adopt the ordinance at that point. So it's just that the public hearing is required to adopt the ordinance. If you say, you know what, we want more time, we've gotten some more feedback, we want to look at some more things, you can. So you're not obligated to adopt the ordinance or act on the ordinance at that point.
I think it'd be good to have the public hearing, you know, and so having the draft amendments to the ordinance would be nice so that we can have the public hearing and we can get the feedback that way to at least start the discussion. I mean,
You have something for the public to react to.
right?
I think we can
Exactly.
decide on, in September, 5th, that, hey, we need more time, and then not make the adoption then and wait.
And we've talked about having public hearings and kind of putting a pin in it and coming back.
Right.
But, it kind of goes back to, are we okay with freely going right now? Or do we want to restrict it? And we can always loosen the reins later if we wanted to, but I'm not opposed to having the public hearing in September, listening to public input, And if we're not ready to make that commitment, we can always bring it back in October.
Can't we make a commitment on at least like one or two? I mean, does it have to be the whole thing at once, or can we say, well, we feel comfortable voting on these ordinances?
Yes,
Then,
yeah, so each one of these, again, would be its own ordinance with its own notice public hearing. So there'll be an ordinance to restrict by the use of under the age of 21. That'll be its own ordinance, its own public hearing. So there'll be essentially 3 ordinances and 3 public hearings.
Perfect.
So on September 5th, if you say, well, we're good, we feel good to go on underage and the moratorium, then you can adopt it. If we get to the actual where you're allowing, the cannabis to be used and you want more time, then you can just, essentially, you can table that one for further discussion.
right, okay. Councilman Scott, are you good with that?
September council meeting is,
September 5th. So it'll be Tuesday, September 5th, because Monday is Labor Day. So the notices would be issued, we would begin drafting them immediately, and then the notices for the public hearings would be in the August 23rd edition of the Echo. As well as.
see, I wouldn't mind. I would lean more in the direction of allowing additional time, looking at scheduling the public hearing for October. It's 3 weeks from tonight, and we're still in a busy time of the year. I think, it just seems to me like we owe it to people to have ample time. Yeah, we always have the ability to not pass the ordinance, but I think we all know how things like that typically work. Public hearings held, ordinances in front of us. Is it really going to get laid over a month?
What do you think the additional time will actually give us?
I think it'll give the public time to think about it, to understand how it might impact the community, and we might benefit from some pretty invaluable feedback in a number of ways. That's kind of what I'm thinking. It's not necessarily, I think, for the council's direct benefit. It's really more for the public.
I think we could always see like what feedback we get in
Yeah.
that next 3 weeks too. And if it's not sufficient in September, we don't vote on anything. I think,
We
Can we
can
call
vote,
for a second public hearing?
Oh, yeah. You can call for as many public hearings as you want.
yeah, and we don't have to say right now specifically that that's going to be on the agenda for September 5th. We're just voting tonight on
No,
these
the
things.
public hearing would come on
Oh,
September
it would
5th.
come on,
Yeah, with
okay.
what,
Now, whether or
yeah,
not
so
we
what I kind
decide
of had
or
in the
not.
packet, the assumption would be, if you could vote on all 3 and then say, but instead of having them come on September 5th, you don't want them to come until October 2nd. Right now, it's kind of assumed it would be September 5th, but if you would prefer they come, we start the drafting, but don't bring it back until October 2nd, that's up to you.
I'm good with public hearing on September 5th and just deciding that night whether or not, based on what we hear. I mean, I don't know if adding another month is actually going to change anything. I think people already kind of have an idea of what they want to see when it comes to this. And it's not like we're restricting, I mean, I think all of these things, besides the last, the private property available to the public, I mean, we don't have to vote on September 5th, but the penalty under 21 and the moratorium, I don't see a huge contentious issue with either one of those.
I agree.
So,
I think per Rebecca's comments, if we don't feel the public input is sufficient, we don't have to
right,
move forward and we get more input.
right. Okay. Any other discussion on this? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All right.
Motion carries.
Madam Mayor, with one other quick item I mentioned earlier, and I apologize, I actually didn't get in the packet. Going back to the Parks and Recreation Committee's recommendation that I mentioned earlier, they did also include tobacco in parks. Do you want us to draft language to include that? Or is that something you'd like to potentially take up at a later date?
I guess my thought would be to bring it back at a later date as
Yeah.
a separate ordinance, if that's something that
Not
Parks and Rec
confuse it
would
with
want
the
us to
cannabis?
look at.
Yeah,
Keep it
so we
separate.
can have a good discussion on it, not necessarily tied to cannabis, because I think like, they are 2 different issues. And people might have different viewpoints on those as well. So a later date, for sure.
So when they made the recommendation on tobacco, what was that getting at? Smoking, chewing?
Smoking, I think that's primarily smoking.
Because that affects other people around you, so.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay.
we will move on to the City Hall architecture and design proposal.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this goes into, again, I'll give a little background, again, kind of where we've come. So again, as part of the 2024 budget, the City Council included doing a facility assessment on City Hall. That was done by Widseth throughout the winter. In May, workshop on May 16th, the City Council received that initial report. What that initial report, again, said, and all this is available on the city's website. We have a page specifically under projects for the City Hall. What that said is that this building, as it stands right now, has about roughly $750,000 worth of deficiencies. And then at that time, Widseth also presented three other options in addition, in response to just fixing the building as it is, looking at also addressing the spatial needs we have, especially as we're looking at the growth of the city. Options going from just remodeling and expanding this building, and then two options looking at different variations of building a new building. At that workshop, the council said you wanted to get some public input, and then you also had earlier hired Baker Tilly to do some financial analysis for that project as well as Bushman, and you wanted to see Baker Tilly's financial analysis. So starting June 6th, we've had, essentially since June 6th, we've had the display in the entry of City Hall up for people who come in to interact with. We've actually got a lot of people every time they come in, interact with it. The vast majority, I would say easily over 95% of the comments have been positive, one way or another, whether remodel or build new. It's kind of been a mixed bag of what people want to see, but in both situations they were very in favor of doing something. On June 14th, we held an open house here at City Hall where people were allowed to walk through the entirety of City Hall. We took them all the staff spaces. They were able to go into the basement. We had Lindsay and Mike with Widseth here to answer any in-depth detail questions people had. We had 11 people attend that open house. And then on the city website, on the page for City Hall, we've had a comment box. Again, pretty much that went up. The city website launched on the 12th, and I think it went up with the day of the city website launching. We had that project page up, and we've had people's ability to comment through there. All the written comment, both either through sticky notes that we've had out front or through the city website, we've included in your packet. Again, the majority of the comments we got, a lot of it were verbal. People really not interested in necessarily writing it down. And then Baker Tilly also conducted their financial analysis, which was presented to the council at your budget kickoff meeting on August 1st last week, and that is attached to the packet. Really kind of a summary of what that said is Baker Tilly looked into the city's financials. They looked at what is our bonding authority, how much capacity we have, as we have no debt. We have over, it is, I think, over $23 million in bonding capacity. $23,208,848 in bonding capacity, so we're not really in concern there. What that means is, where that comes from is state statute limits your debt to 3% of your estimated market value. So that's where that number comes from. A couple of analysis they did put out just for review for yourself and also for the public. They looked at specific two things within our budget. In 2022, the city budgeted $230,000 to pay off its last remaining general obligation bond from 2012. And then for the 2023 budget, looking to the future, looking at future projects the city might have, knowing that we might have to be bonding in the future, the council opted to keep that money in the budget helps put away for cash reserves, as well as essentially built-in debt payment for future debt payments without having to increase the levy. Additionally, the city's been putting $342,000 away for future street improvements, and that also could easily be moved into a future debt payment. So in their summary, they broke it out, each one kind of what over a 15-year term the estimated net proceeds would be. If you were to combine the two $572,000, it comes out to an estimate net proceeds of $5,818,540. So that's in theory what the city could bond today without adding a dollar to the levy. Also, I shared with the council that looking at our cash reserves, I estimate there's about $3 million in cash that the council could easily spend and still leave us with multiple millions in reserves for future CIPs and rainy day, and just making sure and keeping a healthy fund balance. So between the 3.85 and then the little over roughly 3 in cash, I shared with the council that pretty much leaves, in theory, up to $9 million that the city could spend on projects, whatever those projects could be, without increasing the levy. So that was that presentation. Baker Tilly, Chris Hogan with Baker Tilly made that presentation to the council. And then afterwards you went into further discussion on what you thought was then the best thing to do. And the consensus that came out of that meeting was to move forward into the next step, which is conceptual design on a new building, which in the packet from the elements from May 16th was option 3. So that includes city council chambers and office space, with then the intention of putting in a community room, library, gymnasium, pool, and fitness center as designed. We'll call them add alternates. So the intention here is that they would be designed. We'd kind of see where in a building that they would go, how big they would be, and their cost X price for each element. And then at some point, probably after schematic design was done, the council would then make the decision on whether you wanted to actually move forward with any of the items into final design and then ultimate bidding. The benefit of doing the schematic design is you'd at least know where things would go. And if the council chooses not to do any of those items, they're still there for future councils if they would like to if funds become available in the future to construct them. It's already the concept, the schematic design of kind of how big it would be and where it would go is already completed. So with that, actually I'll invite Lindsay Creans with Widseth up, and she can kind of walk you through the details of their proposal on schematic design.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Lindsay Krenz with Widseth. David, I think you did a fantastic job of outlining the process we've been through over the last year and a half to understand this facility, its capacity to handle remodels, additions, additional square footage, improvements to the existing facility that are needed, ADA improvements, site improvements, from the parking lot to lighting, accessibility, getting in and out of the building itself. So through the design process, looking at option 3, our proposal outlines going forward with the schematic design process. A lot of the work done in the facility assessment has already been applied to this proposal. We've done a lot of programming work with the city staff, understanding the facility needs, the square footage requirements for the building. And so a lot of that is already included into this proposal. So we can kind of jump ahead into this process, starting with the schematic design. So we would start with user group sessions, understanding the different users of the building. We have city staff, administration, yourselves. We also have different groups of public members that use the building. We have the library, we have the kitchenette space, we have the park right outdoors, so they're using the site as well. And so understanding how they use the building will help us further investigate what a new facility could have in it and accommodate. We would also provide a full building code review as part of this process. So the initial option 3, like Administrator Chansky said, as the basic city functions, but then the add alternates to have some additional community spaces, such as community room, library, gymnasium, pool, and fitness room. There's a wide array of options, and so we want to make, from a building code perspective, that we're designing and building the plans appropriately. We would also look extensively at the site. There are some grading challenges with the site adjacent to this facility to the north, so we would want to fully understand that, as well as any site improvements that are required here with the existing city hall. We would also go into narrative processes for the mechanical and electrical engineering. So as Administrator Chansky pointed out, at the end of the schematic design process, there would be another review and approval process to move forward within the design and into construction and bidding, or to pause there and to hold the project there. It'll be a very thorough schematic design package at the end of this phase. Along with this phase, we would like to dig deeper into the project costs. That not only takes into consideration the construction costs, but soft costs as far as architectural and engineering and service, owner-provided equipment, furniture and fixtures, contingencies, and then also potentially temporary office provisions if any is required. In addition to the proposal, we outlined a full project schedule. So if you were to move forward tonight, rolling into September 2023, we wanted to outline this process so you could see how that would fall into a calendar year. So conceptually, September 2023 would be the schematic design. Upon approval, we could look at design development in October of 2023, with wrapping up construction documents for bidding by the end of the year. So then at the start of the next year, 2024, you could expect to finish construction documents, bid, and award a project in February, which in turn would be really advantageous for spring construction schedules. So we just kind of wanted to put together a draft schedule on what that could potentially look like if the project was to move forward.
Madam Mayor, so I want to ask two quick things, just piggybacking off of Lindsay. One, just reiterate kind of what Lindsay said here. The proposal that's before you tonight is strictly for the schematic design, so kind of the next step. So we'll do schematic, and then again, kind of like I said, even with like Bushman, then there's that pause. Schematic design happens, presented to you, and then you decide, okay, is it time to go to the next step? You do whatever you need to do, get info from the public. Again, part of public input will be part of this process, but if there's any further public input you want, again, we move forward at the next step, again, based off of your direction. So it would be another agreement to go into final design. The other thing I just wanted, I realized after I asked Lindsay to come up that I failed to mention was that for the public, that the council also did discuss, you know, one of the things that came up in May and then discussed last week was if the council moves forward and the city builds a new building, we still have this building, right? And we still have this building with its deficiencies. One of the things the council discussed is what potential uses it could be in the future. And that's something that we will continue throughout this process. We will continue to investigate on what future uses we could have for this building. We don't want to necessarily assume that it would be leveled, but if there's another use that would benefit the community, looking at that as with an emphasis on limiting the cost to the city. So we wouldn't be looking at, you know, building a new building plus remodeling this building. It would be, what can we do with this building? And if we can get someone else, another user, to pay for the remodels, that would be the priority. So that's just something that we would kind of do on the side. Widseth wouldn't be doing that analysis. Staff, we would be doing that analysis all, like, as Widseth is also going through this phase. My intention would be, if we get through, if the council accepts this proposal, we do schematic design. By the time schematic design is done, we have also started to engage stakeholders. Again, we won't have necessarily someone who's ready to come in and take this building from us, but we'll actually have some ideas for you of what you could further pursue for this building. So with that, I guess now we'll take any questions the council has on the proposal in front of you.
Cost-wise, was this something that was included in this year's budget?
Yes, so when we were looking at, this would be a capital fund cost. So that was our recommendation, this would be included. out of the capital fund. So the city council last year, when they were discussing this, kind of included the original design or original plan in the levy with, I think it was understanding of if we moved forward, we would use capital fund dollars for moving forward.
And I kind of want to piggyback off of the workshop because we had a really thorough analysis of financials. And I know there's a lot of people that are correlating certain things to whether it's increasing taxes or whatever the case is. And kind of the justification or kind of why we are moving forward on a new build had to do with, one, if this is down to the studs, we don't know what we're going to find. So those costs could potentially be more. I think the second thing is that if we could build new and have someone else pay for the remodel of this one based on a public partnership, that would be something that we would be interested in as well, because then we weren't covering both those costs. And I think that we all liked the idea of spending as little money as possible to get a new building with looking at all of the potentials that the new building could have in future years. So there was a couple different, I think, things that really contributed to this. And the reason we went with this is because I think long-term that investment is greater. Plus there's a lot of costs associated with remodeling that were empty costs, like you guys working out of a trailer, running, the cost to run cable or internet to you guys. And so there's, again, I kind of want to just talk about how we came to that conclusions, because I think it's important that people understand that part of it as well.
I would agree with that. I think residents, though, have made it loud and clear. I mean, they're very concerned about taxes. If you look at option one, just strictly remodel or getting this building up to code, ADA accessible, that's an excessive amount of money with not improving staff working conditions. The remodel, yes, economically, okay, that number is, number-wise, it's less. But you're still spending an exorbitant amount of money just to make it ADA compliant. It's still the same structural things, you're getting the space. But I think where the council agreed was, look at the police station. That was built, Public Works building was built 25 years ago for $1.5 million, which was a substantial amount of money. And it was 25 years, Brian, approximately. It's been a long time.
2005.
Yeah, so it's been a long time. But resident feedback is key throughout this process. With going with option three, costs need to be reduced. I wouldn't support a $3 million building. David has said it before, we don't need to build Taj Mahal. We need functionality for staff and the public. So I think going forward with design makes sense, but it has to have public engagement. As a council, we have to look at the number that in the schematic design phase, what is it going to be?
Yeah, some of the other discussions not really outlined here has been the staff accessibility for the community to come in, work with staff. As of now, we'd have limited staff on site if we went with a mobile trailer of some sort out in the parking lot. Not very conducive to the business, while it could work, but that was another item. The one thing that I wanted to kind of outline that we did kind of a sidebar conversation when we were talking about the sketch of the additional gym, pool, public room. Those are more for where would they go if we choose to go with that. If you design a building without those considerations of what the public has been asking for, when it came time that we wanted to move forward with it, it's trying to play Tetris and where does that figure out? Where now if we actually put it in that sketch, we know how the building's gonna work out with if we do move forward with a pool or a gym. So it's not necessarily saying we're going down that path, but if it's not on that document to say where would it go, should the time come to say we're gonna design and move forward with that, we know where it's at. So this is not obligating us to move forward with those add-on items.
And I think to piggyback off that as well is that once we have that design, that schematic design, we're able to then go and get bids. And if the bids come back and we don't like what we're seeing based on that design, or we're looking at, maybe this design is going to be this cost. So we could really, at any point still say, we don't like any of these bids, it's too high, and not move forward. So it really is still giving us a lot of that flexibility to go through the process of a new build, but still get to a place that we get a bid that we're like, yes, we are good with this. It aligns with the financial situation of the city. So I do feel that, again, we are kind of in control throughout the entire process, all the way through the bidding process.
And I just want to mention that, we did discuss, remodel. We did look at that. At first, that's kind of where I was looking. But then I have, in 2021, and in that time frame, and I know Lindsay, we worked together on that, the Breezy Point, the community center task force, and the feasibility that was done for that. And it's been important for me to sort of be a champion for those voices of the people that do want some sort of community center, a place where people can come to gather, whether that's like a small workout room, a small walking trail, a gym, something like that. And when we discussed with the engineers, like if you remodeled this building, could you add on like other features like that? And he said they would definitely not recommend trying to do a remodel and then add on like a gym or a pool, even in the future, just because of the issues with the construction. So that's sort of what moved me in sort of the other direction of trying to be able to do a new build and then have sort of the potential options, not necessarily for today, it could be 10, 15 years down the road, but just so we could see what that would look like and what the potential cost would be.
And I think we just want residents to know that we are being extremely mindful of taxes. Obviously, we have talked about this a lot, especially kind of where things are at with the state and taxes. So it is top priority for us. We're not looking at our financial situation and going, oh, we have 9 million available to us. We're just going to go and bond the 5 that we can get and spend this. Like, that is not the direction that we want to go. That is not the conversations that we're having. So we do want our residents to understand that like these decisions, we are being very mindful of taxes and the levy. I think that's really critical to get across to our residents.
And Madam Mayor, if there's one other thing I will just point out too is obviously WSB is here to give you an update on Bushman. I think one of the things the council did also discuss, very aware that Bushman is also hanging out there in a project that the city is working through. Also a very potentially expensive project should the council continue to move down towards doing that project. And kind of timelines where we're at with these two projects is that the council moves forward with schematic design around the same time that schematic design will likely be done. We should probably have a preliminary design on Bushman. So you'll essentially have now 2 solid, not the guaranteed costs. You won't have guaranteed costs until you go out to bid, but 2 solid preliminary costs for both City Hall and Bushman. And now the council will really have that ability to kind of say, okay, what do we want to do? We've got these 2 projects plus future things down the road, and how do we want to allocate funds appropriately?
And I think that was one of the really good things about having Baker Tilly do the analysis, because it wasn't just an analysis on City Hall. It was analysis on all of the projects. It was sewer expansion, City Hall, Bushman. I mean, it was looking at our entire financial picture, which is what we wanted out of the second to last workshop that we had, was that it's really hard to make decisions if we don't have like the full picture. So that was nice to have that kind of like bigger picture. So we are going to be able to make better decisions because of that.
I think also, to Michael's point, yes, I mean, having the add-ons in there, if you're going to build new, that makes sense. And to what Rebecca said for community center, but that could be years down the road. I mean, the reality is Cross Lake Parks and Rec's budget's $1 million or a little more a year. I mean, it's not just the discussion on the add-ons, but it's also the cost associated with the city running a community center, staffing. Those are huge costs, but at least it's there for future councils, but again, that's resident feedback that is required, and it's a big expense.
What month was it that we had a workshop where, for the first time, we talked about City Hall and its needs and had that conversation? Do you remember?
May, I think at our council retreat.
Yeah, so May was when you were presented with the facility assessment.
So from May, and I wasn't, just to clarify, I wasn't able to make the August 1st workshop meeting, unfortunately. So to me, this feels extremely rushed. I'm not saying that something doesn't need to happen with City Hall. That's not what I'm getting at. But we go from, as a council, the first time having a conversation in May to now in August, committing almost $30,000 for schematic of a new building that we don't even know where it's going to be situated. So how do you do complete renderings and schematic of a building with no location?
So the preliminary, when we did preliminary was discussed, it pretty much go right here between this existing building and the public safety building.
That map is in here.
Okay, so
Essentially where the small pavilion is right now.
It's in your agenda packet online.
I'm trying to read my handwriting.
That was what was proposed back in May, correct?
Yep, correct. And also, if you actually go back even further to the community center feasibility study, that was actually even the same location that, if at that point they recommended, they were looking at for a potential future community center, was that location as well. So that's always, that location for a while, for a couple of years now, has been identified as kind of that future growth space.
So the second point I was going to make is part of the reason why I feel this is a bit rushed is we really haven't even had an opportunity to explore other options. What other approaches might be out there? Is this something, not necessarily in terms of a city hall, but now if we're going to add all these other components to it, is this potentially something we got to be partnering with an existing business in the community or some other entity to build and operate as opposed to the city? So it just feels to me like, yet again, I think we'd benefit from some additional time, more exploration of options, other opportunities that haven't been considered. I guess I'm not comfortable with going from initial discussions in May. Again, as a new council, I'm not discounting the fact that Mike and Rebecca were part of a council that had probably sufficient conversation on the needs before, but I just clearly can't get behind this with the little amount of time that's passed that we've talked about this and thought about needs and are now setting a course forward to spend money.
If I may respond to that, Councilmember Scott, in the schematic design process, the user group intake sessions are a wonderful way to engage with your community members, the staff and users of the building and a potential new building. And so we can really drill into specific needs and goals of that facility a lot more in detail. Right now it's very conceptual and high level intentionally. We kind of want to make it that way as far as the feasibility study goes with the first process that we presented in May. And so taking this next step would allow for you to really understand the breadth and scope of not only the kind of the core building, but some of the additional amenities. Right now it's a very open-ended. Let's pick on the pool. It's kind of easy to pick on. Is it a 4-lane pool or a 12-lane pool? I mean, that's very exaggerated, but to really understand the concepts of what some of these requests have been will really come to fruition through that schematic design process, as well as some tangible soft costs and budgeting that go along with that. And so you would then have the opportunity to pause after schematic design is completed and go back out to business members, other communities, other partnership opportunities, and have a more realistic conversation with some actual tangible information based on the information we gather in this next step.
David, can you clarify what the prior council had approved? And I forget when last year it happened, where they did some approval of with the community center?
So you had back in 2020, 2021 was the community center feasibility study. So that was that. Purpose of that study was really just to look at where could the community center go, what kind of elements are members of the public interested in. There was a task force that had how many people on it, Lindsay?
10, I think.
Around a dozen, Rebecca. I know it was
10 or
members of
12.
council and members of the public. I know Mr. Schroden was on that committee.
I was as well.
Yep. And so that kind of ended with the package of here's kind of where it could go, what elements could be in one. And then last year, that's when the council started to talk about, we had to start having facility discussions. And that's when they said, okay, we actually do need to look at this facility. When we started to identify a lot of issues, even just looking at having the building official walk through. And that's when the council said, okay, we want to do a feasibility study specifically on this building. And the elements that they wanted to include that was in WIDSA's proposal was what would it take just to get this building up to code? And then looking at recognizing that there were some spatial deficiencies. What would a remodel expansion look like? And then what would a new build plus new build kind of with the community center elements look like?
Do you recall, just ballpark, what the costs were associated with those two undertakings? Yeah, total. I mean,
So how much was the feasibility study?
On the community center,
Yeah.
total, if we did the whole thing, I think it was 6 to 8 million.
No, the cost of the study itself.
feasibility study.
I don't recall off the top of my head.
20 something, 25, 30,000. I don't know I wasn't here for that, so I have to look up the exact number about that. And then the feasibility study was, I think your proposal was 18.5. I mean, the facility assessment was 18.5. As Lindsay said, that's one of the reasons why actually their proposal for schematic is actually where it is because they've been able to do all of these steps, which have made each step easier because there was stuff to build off of.
And I would say too, I mean, we had 3 hours in a conversation with the workshop. I'm sorry that you weren't able to come, but we were given a lot of numbers and a lot of recommendations by people who know more about this than we do. And so I do feel comfortable about moving forward based on how much time total in between those two workshops, 5 to 6 hours that we've spent analyzing this and looking at this. So for us, I don't know if we actually need much more information than what we already have to go on to the next stage, which is the schematic design.
I think Michael, he did ask the question, Brad, in the workshop. It didn't cost any more design-wise, correct, just to look at the add-ons. I have your same concerns about the add-ons, and that has to be a discussion because the cost is very high, and in my opinion, it's many years down the road. But if you're going to build new and the cost, the number makes sense, why would you not for future? And I think that's what we really looked at was future. I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. I spoke earlier about the Parks and Recs budget. It's a huge amount of money, but dotted line, there is options. There has to be more public input.
And I think it's nice to show the, citizens of Breezy Point what the costs for those features are. We have seen comments come in and written comments and emails and things for people that want the community center features. So it's nice to at least we can break down the cost for those features for them so they can see what that tax impact could potentially be. Again, not trying to raise the levy by an exorbitant amount in 1 year to add in all these features to a potential building, but at least we can see what that would look like, where it would go, what the potential cost for that would be, at some point, now or in the future. So.
And one item was that the council did discuss is if those elements are designed, not necessarily built, is maybe then there's opportunities where members of our community want to donate towards, maybe there's someone who is really passionate about a project and chooses to donate a significant sum of money towards the construction of something. then the city could at that point consider, okay, maybe it is time. We have a donor that wants to donate 50-60% of the cost to build this project, and then the city could do that at that time.
Or fundraising, we had discussed as well, right? I mean, if there was, I know Pequot has done that with the splash pad. They raised over $100 and something thousand to build it. So there's a lot of options. And the nice thing is because we're doing the schematic design, it's not going to cost us any additional dollars to get these things penciled in the schematic design, which is a huge benefit, because what we don't want to do is not do it, and then 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we're like, oh, we should have figured out what this cost or this cost was, and now we have to go back and spend money again to do that. And here we don't have to spend additional dollars to get that.
Yeah, see, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. You develop schematics and plans today, you think 10 years from now, you're going to be able to pull them off the shelf and have that usable, where you're not repeating or duplicating work effort. Given the current state, things change over time. I mean, I get involved with building projects in my line of work all the time. We put plans together, they sit on the shelf for 3 years. You're redoing probably 40% of those plans. So the idea of spending money now to save money in the future, no.
No, it's not that that's not the additional, it doesn't cost additional to look at potential uses. So let's just say that they gave us a schematic and we have all of these different pieces. It's almost like Tetris, like kind of putting it together, where we're saying, okay, what is this space going to be? What is this space going to be? We're going to understand what those costs are based on that space. And that we would already be doing this based on just already approving that we want to see what the cost is going to be for a new city hall.
So you don't think conditions are going to change over time, different laws come about?
Potentially.
Well, not potentially, it will happen. That's a given. I mean, the one thing we know is constant is change.
But, so I don't really understand like what you're kind of, where you're going with that,
If
though.
you're selling this or making the pitch that we spend the money now, so 5 or 10 years from now, we've saved money because we already have this information in hand?
That's not it at all. So we're already spending the money because we want to know what it's going to cost us to build a new city hall. We're already looking at a new city hall, so we are going to move forward with schematics so that we can move forward in the process. So we're just saying that the additional uses of it aren't going to cost us any more than what we'd already be spending for what we're wanting to get for a new city hall.
I didn't follow that at all, but I think it's irrelevant.
Well, if anyone else can explain it better, I guess.
Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on it? I mean,
Actually, I'm kind of following, just turn it on, please.
And you can just hold it up.
Yeah, okay, can you hear? I've been kind of following this, and Lindsay, and with the community center. And what I think happened here is there's some transfer going on from what we did, the work we did with the community center. We had the shops and we had the people in and we did the discussions. And we had a lot of items and stuff that came about from that the community wanted, and they expressed that. So I think what the mayor is saying is that those parts that we've already done, we're gonna take and put some of them, at least add them on, put them in, where they might fit on a city hall during the schematic design. And it's kind of like, we've already got this information that you like, we'll toss it in on there so you can see what it may or may not be. And there is a big need in the city that I was aware of when we did this, that the community does want some things, community center. So to bring that along is cheaper if you're gonna do that. If you take, let's just take the pool. You wanna put the pool on and you guys all decided that we wanna expand that. Well, doing it now with the city hall and finding out the numbers to reach that conclusion to whether or not you want to do it is kind of what you'd be going for. Is that help, or maybe I made it important?
You know, the first part of it, I was tracking with you. The second part, I guess, I'm not necessarily so much in agreement.
I mean, we're reaching out here and here and here, and we've done some work, like I said, with the community center. It's kind of that schematic is trying to bring some of that in to tighten it up some so you can see where you want to go with it. But, you know, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
I think we can move forward with the motion.
one other thing, if I may, on the schematic design, there was a lot of resident input on solar panels. Is that something that can be looked at?
Yes, absolutely. Solar panels as well as additional renewable resources, things that are just inherently built into the building, as well as things that we can glean from the site and the earth.
And Councilmember Jensen, that's where it goes also to kind of that discussion of costs. By doing that, we can look at those renewable items. And again, if it gets to a point where you go, you know what, again, cost isn't, it's a little higher than we want, then we can look, okay, then we can remove this item or this item to try to get the cost down to where the council's comfortable.
And I want to address one more thing, because I know this has been tossed around, the daycare thing, right? So the only reason that was brought up, so right now in Minnesota, there is a ton of funding for childcare centers, tons of funding. I mean, and Widseth has actually worked on, I don't know, 2 or 3?
7.
7 projects recently where there's been building or whatever that looks like, and tenants have come in, gotten the funding through these sources, and use that funding to basically remodel or build these buildings. We would not own the daycares. We would not be competing with private entities. We would be saying, here's our space. We have this building. What is the best use that this building could have that would cost the city little amount of money, but also potentially make us money through leasing? So we want to look at it in the aspect of, if we build a new building but get to keep this building, what could we potentially have here that's going to actually make us money? And that is, I think, a huge thing that we should be looking at for future, because who doesn't want to make investments that, make the city money? So that is where that whole daycare thing is right now. It's not that we would have anything to do with it. It's that the funding opportunities, and just, again, daycare is very scarce right now, so there's lots of funding for it. So I just wanted to address that, because I know there's been some talk about what that actually looks like.
Yeah, and I think we discussed, because if we did move forward with a new building, the time between now and the time that the staff would be exiting this building would provide sufficient time to sort of vet those future uses and things, like David mentioned, so, yeah.
This time, Madam Mayor, I'd make a motion to accept the proposal from Widseth in developing the schematics for the new city hall.
I'll second.
Any other discussion on that?
None for me.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to move on now to the old business. Rezoning application for the disc golf course. parking
Thank you,
lot.
Madam Mayor. So on Tuesday, the June 13th, the Planning Commission did consider the rezoning of lots 3, 4, and 5, Wipert 16. PIDs are listed in your memo. Again, those are the parcels intended to be used right now as a parking lot for the disc golf course expansion. The Planning Commission did vote unanimously to recommend that the City Council do rezone those lots from R2 medium density residential to P public. Additionally, with their recommendation, they recommended that the 100-car parking lot is not conducive to residential character of the surrounding neighborhood, and therefore should be reduced by at least half, with remaining space used for park amenities. Additionally, that trees and foliage should be used to screen the parking lot from the road. Attached to this memo is a survey that Widseth did on the lots. As the survey can be shown, Daniel, if you can get to the survey, that'd be great. What they did is they took the 3 lots together, and then working with Joe and then Jerry, pretty much went, okay, what are the setbacks and where would it go based off of the current grading. So what you can see in the gray is the area that the surveyors with Widseth determined would kind of essentially be the usable area for a parking lot. The curvy black line, not the swirly one, but the curvy one that kind of goes around it, that's the line. That's what, if you were to go out there today, it looks like, but that's obviously not would be the final. So what we looked at is it would be, looking at meeting our ordinance 20 feet off of the property line, some 40 feet from the actual roadway. So right now, if you go out there, it looks like it goes all the way to the road. It wouldn't go to the road. It would be, back to the property line and then 20 feet off of that. And then the area in the shaded, we have taken into account for swales and stormwater runoff and all that. It comes out to approximately 22,133 square feet, or effectively half an acre. So that is kind of what we're working with at this point, is about a half an acre area for parking. The original plan was for 0.9 acres, but once we started doing the grading, again, all the grading, all the fill that was there was from on-site. We did not bring any fill in. If you went out there a year and a half ago, it was like a mound, and pretty much what happened is that hill got kind of pushed and flattened out. So again, early on, before they kind of began, the goal was, and the SWIP plan permit we had was for 0.9 acres. Once they actually went out and leveled it, that's where we kind of ended up with what we have now, which was really the kind of the 0.5 acres of usable space. I know the number that's kind of been thrown around under the 0.9 acres was a 100-car parking lot. So we did ask Woodseth to kind of throw lines, kind of parking lines based off of the average size parking stall, what it could look like. If you see they just threw lines on there. Obviously it goes off of the page or off of the gray area. So in reality, when you kind of count for drive lanes and such, it really comes to like an absolute like max capacity in that configuration of about 60 cars. Now the thing I want to clarify, that's like if you pave that lot and you stripe it. The plan has always been for gravel. And so, as I think most people are familiar with gravel lots, how the parking goes really is determined by the first car. And then from there, how people park is kind of based off of that first car, what kind of rows they do, how big are drive lanes between rows. It just kind of naturally happens unless there's someone actually out there physically parking the cars. So I estimate that in reality, 60 cars is like the absolute max, and that'd be like if someone was out there parking, or organic parking, my guess would create a lot less than even 60 on there. So you have, in this situation, what we'd also be recommending is we agree with the Planning Commission, staff, we agree with the Planning Commission, that after all the grading is done, that area between the gray and the property line, definitely plant foliage, some kind of natural screening, whether that's trees, shrubbery. Joe and I would discuss kind of what we think best fits there. Something that's obviously minimal maintenance, doesn't require a lot of maintenance watering, that over the time would screen the parking lot from White Overlook. So that's kind of, we wanted to give you a pictorial kind of really what we're working with. So at this point, I think kind of the direction we're looking for the council is, one, whether or not to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation to first rezone that, and then what you want to do with the design or the size of the parking lot. Our recommendation from staff is to keep it at kind of set it at that maximum 0.5 acres, and install the natural screening elements. Regarding future park things, you have kind of discussed that in the past. The Planning Commission said maybe you should consider those items. Obviously, nothing's really been determined on anything. Kind of our opinion is, especially it being a gravel parking lot, it's a lot easier to always take a gray. So in the future, 2-3 years down the road, you decide to put an element on that lot, and it's best determined to go in an area that is, in that gray, in that parking area. It's a gravel parking lot, you can take it away and easily kind of redesign, shrink the parking lot. So it's kind of one of those things, it's easier to take away parking than it is to add parking. If the council was considering paving the lot, that'd be a little bit of a different discussion. We'd be going, okay, then we should consider your areas for future expansion right now. But considering we're gravel, I don't think on our staff's opinion, it really doesn't hamper any future amenities because, again, it's gravel. You can just regrade it and put something else there and alter the size of the parking lot. So That's where our recommendation right now for that no greater than 0.5 acres with the natural screening elements. But ultimately, we're looking for the council, what you would like to see with the design of the parking lot. I know Joe will give later tonight, I'll get the staff reports, he'll give an update on the disc golf course itself. But this is really the last significant element remaining on that project.
And how many total acres is the whole?
Those three lots
Those three
together
lots.
are just shy of 1 acre. I think they're each like 0.33 acres, so it's like rounds to about an acre for all three lots.
Okay.
And our SWIP permit, or sort of stormwater plant permit, was for 0.9 acres of impervious.
Do you have the planning commission's, I guess, justifications for their recommendation? In their recommendation, did they include any, this is behind the basis of why we're recommending the rezoning?
Pretty much where they landed, and Councilmember Jensen was there as well. But I think from where they landed was, if the council's intention is to use this for public use, it should be zoned as public.
Yeah,
There was no other justification like this is spoken to in the comprehensive plan for future public parking, or, I mean, there wasn't any additional justification or rationale behind that. It was just, if it's going to be used for parking, let's rezone it.
their recommendations were based off discussion. In the one that got omitted was, adding a park on the other half, but it was just based off discussion amongst the planning commission members.
Did staff happen to do any review within this city of previous properties rezoned for parking for a city park area? I guess I'm just curious to know whether we have other developed parking areas for parks. I mean, obviously, we've got the park here, and
We've got the
How many
original,
spaces
we have
are
the
here, but-
original, the parking for the original 18 off of Green Scene, the Green Scene, or on the east side of the park.
Yes.
Green Scene.
The Green Scene. And then we also have the Four Seasons Trail parking lot. And let's see, Public Beach, that's on-street parking, and the dock is on-street, the fishing pier is on-street parking, and then the Sad Park is on-street parking.
Correct.
and there's one on Winter Trail, is there not?
Yeah, so that's the Four Seasons Trail, that's the one off of Winter Trail, so.
How many spots are there, do you know? Roughly?
Joe, would you say dozen, 2 dozen?
Dozen at very best. It's very odd shaped.
Again, it's a gravel lot as well. So. And so is the original 18, that's a gravel lot.
Well, I think no matter what, we do need to rezone it because that is our process now to make sure that we are rezoning our land. But I think those are going to be separate from the,
I'll make the motion
Fine.
to accept the planning commission's recommendation to rezone lots 3 through 5, White Birch 16 from R2 to public, and also to reduce the parking lot area to no greater than 0.5 acres and install the natural screening elements between the parking lot and the right-of-way.
I'll second.
any other discussion on this?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I'm voting obviously against this. I find it rather peculiar that the Planning Commission would make a recommendation to approve rezoning without any additional criteria, recommendation, justification that would at least point to future land use. I guess that's my primary issue with this parking lot. Nowhere else in this city do we have a parking lot of this size to support a park. And I would argue that the trail, where we've got the 12 spots, would serve more people at any particular point in time than the disc golf course. And we've got spots there for 12, the way it sounds. So,
0.22 acres approximately is the Winter Trail parking lot size.
right, I'm just thinking about, the area that serves, right? I mean, that's really there for people to get on the trails and,
Correct.
Right.
I'm just referring based on the GIS, that's its approximate size.
the parking area itself.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not the drive lanes per
Yeah.
se.
So I guess what I was wanting to just point out there is we've got, to me, a very, I guess, dissimilar use of land in a residential neighborhood occurring. And I think, among other things, that's a very risky precedent to set.
I would like to see the lot of smaller than what is being proposed.
We just, yeah, we cut it down to 0.5.
Yeah, I realize that. I'd like to see it
Smaller than 0.5?
smaller than the 0.5.
What size would you?
0.04. It's some, we gotta cut.
One car.
Yeah. No, that's more than one car. But there's been,
Part of the reason for the bigger lot was because we have a history with the existing lot for the prior disc golf course and the parking on the road at times for events. So I think besides the potential for like some sort of park pavilion or some other uses in that area, some of the reason for the larger parking lot was to accommodate those cars that were then parking on the road. So that was sort of the idea behind it at the time.
The goal was that we heard from citizens that they didn't want the on-street parking, so they wanted a parking spot. So that's where the city went out to purchase the 3 lots, and I did take a look. It's 0.5 something, 0.48, 0.48. So we're at about 1.3 or 1.4 total acreage between those 3 properties that we own, just looking on the GIS there. So the goal was to accommodate more. And that's to alleviate the on-street. If we want to make it a smaller parking lot, we can, but if you look at like the beach, if it's overwhelmed, you get people parking more not in the designated
I'm well aware
parking
of the
spots. Yep.
beach.
You look at the other parks that have on-street parking, you get people pulling up into the ditch area where the fishing pier is at. And so the goal was to remove it from on-street. We have the said parcels now. If you wanted to remove it down to a smaller, you can, but what you're gonna encourage more is more on-street. If you're more for more on-street parking, that's a better way to go.
I think the only reason you would have the on-street is for tournaments. If you needed additional parking, I don't think the use on a daily basis would require the lot that large. What the original thought process, in my opinion, was to accommodate tournaments. And this is a residential area, but it was. That's why it was made the size that it was. As far as the rezoning, yes, if the city owns it, it should be public, but I don't want to see the on-street parking, but, the size was definitely driven by parking for tournaments.
I think that's why we looked to reduce it too, was that we had discussed potentially in the future doing a park or pavilion, and if we did that, that would, obviously, people would be parking in that parking lot to bring their kids to the,
Correct.
park,
yeah,
and so.
Understood.
And I think, David, too, you mentioned there's always, since it's gravel, assuming we don't pave it, then you can always make it smaller.
Correct.
There's nothing to stop you from shrinking it down to add something in, but.
Well, theoretically, the stormwater permit was for .09, they're .05.
0.9.
0.9.
Or .9. Yeah, .9, correct. So there is additional space.
So Steve, real quick, since you're going to 0.09, 0.05, are you asking to go from 0.5 to 0.4?
Well, I thought it was .04.
But did you think it was 0.05 as well?
What? It was .9, I was going off the stormwater
Yep,
permit.
it was 0.9,
Yeah.
and you wanted to go to 0.04? from
0.4.
0.4.
Okay.
.4.
I thought you meant 0.04.
.4.
0.04.
Okay, that's why I
I
said
did,
one
but I
parking lot.
misspoke.
So
0.4.
you're asking for a tenth of an acre smaller?
Yes.
How many cars is that? 10?
Well,
Depending on how they park.
resident comment on the lot when this discussion came and the clear cutting was there's 70 spots here?
There's like
If-
60. I really,
You're not going to fit
I really
that.
try to refrain from talking about how many cars can park in a gravel parking lot, purely because without striping, and unless someone is actually parking cars, it really depends on the organic parking of how many cars will actually get in there, whether it's cars, trucks, you know, whether someone chooses to parallel park versus diagonal park versus, you know, how people choose to park naturally will affect how many cars can be in there. That's what I was saying. If it's paved and striped, in that scenario, then I think you could see close to roughly 60, if it was paved and striped.
And we can always take, like he said, like, we can always take away if we figure out too that maybe even 0.5 is too big, or like maybe the cars aren't parking, you know, maybe they're only fitting 40. So we're not necessarily like stuck on even the 0.5.
Understood.
Nice to
It's a good
see once
starting
the
point, though.
Sort of, the screening elements are in there. I think it would be nice to see how that's done, because I think that would be an important part of just making it look more natural
Yeah.
out
Of course, that's
there, as
another
opposed to
discussion on the screening elements. Is there a time frame this year, next spring?
Joe?
Fall would probably be your best window to, plant trees. If that's first we need a decision, kind of
Yeah.
what to do. This fall would be, the optimum time. I wouldn't recommend probably planting in spring. Fall plantings seem to get better, but, we need some direction on it.
We could start right away and see how that goes, and come spring, see how those
And Joe,
take, and
can you just give also the council an estimate of how long, say they go on the
Sure.
current proposal, how long you think it'll take to complete that?
Sure. We're basically probably two guys shaping, because right now, if you drive by, what's staked, it would be ditched all the way around that, so the water goes in all directions. That alone would make it appear much more compact. You'd get shape to it. Probably a week to 4 days, dozer, skid steer. Hauling gravel, depends how much gravel we go, 2, maybe 4 days, depending on how many guys I have available. That should go pretty smooth. I mean, the bulk of the work's done. The moving the dirt, it's just shaping swales, that sort of approaches, that sort of thing. And ditching, the ditch needs to be reestablished. We didn't get to that point, so.
Okay.
any other discussion on it? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. We will move on to communications policy. Chair Chansky, or?
I'll gladly get to it once the computer catches up. Give it 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to continue as best as I can here while this thing tries to unfreeze itself. So, as you guys know, Daniel Lake, Assistant City Administrator for the record. As you guys know, about 2 months ago now, we came forward before you, and this has been an ongoing process for longer than that. But we came before you and talked about some improvements that we wanted to do to communications, and one of those things that you had asked for and told us to get back to you now was a communications policy. Seeing that, we put together some stuff and went ahead and drafted it up. Now, this communications policy that's before you guys tonight is one that I've used before in another municipality. Pretty standard stuff. The language is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing super complicated in it. I figured it would be a nice, simple, basic starter policy that we could get going on. You will notice it is technically a communications policy and a social media policy in one. Generally, we like to put those two things together if we can, so that there's clear guidelines on where everything is, who's allowed to do what, when, where, how, why, who's directing what and what measures and systems are being used to control things and all that stuff. As I said, it's pretty straightforward. If you had any specific questions on a specific portion of the policy as you guys were reading through it, now would be the time to ask. If you thought there was anything to add or remove or that you wanted to change, now would be the time to ask.
I will just say in short, what the policy pretty much states is for all general city communications, I as a city administrator am the person, and then I can designate others to kind of also who have the authority to post on the city's behalf and such. And then Chief Sandell, we did segregate kind of general city and police department, and Chief Sandell would be the authorized person on the police department's side as well. And then he would have the authority to delegate to anyone within the police department whom he chooses to kind of essentially post or comment, not comment, to post on his behalf or issue press releases and such on his behalf.
Okay.
So this is the policy, I forget what month it was, that we had initial discussions about it.
Yeah, June.
So this covers the press releases?
Yes.
Yep,
So
it covers all physical, digital, and social media. It covers everything, basically. I did that on purpose.
Can you just quickly point out where in here that it gets to the press releases?
Sure. So press releases as an overriding part of communications are essentially included in the entire policy. So as you'll notice here, while we're going through here, I point out very early on that this policy covers physical, digital, and social media. So essentially what it does is it's unified throughout the entire document. If you're looking for a specific section that says this is press releases and this is how this is done, it doesn't exist, because to be frank, we don't want that. We want to make it clear that, like, the way the policy is done, as Administrator Transky pointed out, everything is done by, like, designee authority, who's allowed to say what and when they're allowed to say it and those sorts of things. We don't want to have a different designee for, like, press releases, and then have a different designee for, social media, and then have a different designee for the board out front. We want to make sure that all of those things are rounded up under the one department in the one department area. Now, as you go through the policy, you'll see there are guidelines on what can be written, how it can be written, where it can be written, and when, and those sorts of things, and it's all structured throughout the entire policy from as you just punch down through it.
So the policy as it's written and intended does or doesn't allow an elected official to issue a press release. What do we think about that?
If you as a body choose to issue your own press release, that's completely up to you guys.
So pretty much what this says, to answer your question, is no individual council member or elected official could issue a press release on behalf of the city.
So that's what we're saying in this policy, is no elected official issues
On their
a press
own,
release.
correct. Unless the council were to choose to, issue a press release and have the mayor sign it or come from a specific council member, no. It wouldn't be any individual council member can have that decision. That the authority lies with me as the administrator or Chief Sandell as the police chief.
None of us would be able to issue a press release on behalf of the city. So it's basically giving this city and staff administrator the ability to manage the social media on top.
Then what this policy does, this policy guides us on what kind of press releases we should or should not post. So pretty much, if we're issuing a press release, in short, it's going to be based off of something the council has directed. So we're going to issue a press release about an open house. The council's said, yep, we're going to do this open house. We want this thing. We're going to issue a press release on that. For the cannabis, that would be something that, in addition to our required notices, we might issue a press release on, hey, the council is considering cannabis regulations. They're looking for your input. Those are the kind of press releases we as staff, and this policy dictates that that's the kind of press release you would do is again, based off of council input. If there's something that we have questions about, we would bring it back to the council first and saying, hey, there's this things that's come up. Would you like it to have addressed? Do you want us to put that in a press release? But pretty much, if it's something the council is moving forward, is working on, that's the kind of stuff we would include in a press release. Or on social media, on the website, etc.
If it's something worthy of the public knowing about, it's going to be posted about. I.e. when the sewer bills, we were not going to bill them out. You guys did social media posting.
Correct. And we sent
on that.
direct letters reminding people that, hey, you're not getting a sewer bill this month, you'll get it in October.
And this is a living document too. I mean, we're going to continue to probably modify it or
Correct.
change it based on, as we get in, because we're just started this whole social media thing this year. So this is going to be, we'll be actively working on this document for, I think, a while. So
I just wanted to mention quickly that Daniel and David, of course, you guys have done a great job so far, I think, with kind of working towards this,
Yes.
communications, more communications, the website, the Facebook, Nextdoor, all those things. I see the posts, I see the emails come through about Nextdoor updates, I see the Facebook page updates, and I really appreciate the website. It's much easier to navigate, so thank you.
And just for everyone too, we do get the comments directly to us. So if you go to our website and make a comment, we get that email to us. So that's been a really awesome thing because it doesn't have, they're not sending it to Mr. Yarchansky or Daniel and then it's being forwarded to us. If you make a comment on our website, we will get an email and see it. All of us will. So that is really great for us to be able to get that immediate feedback from the community and residents right away.
And I will just,
That was nice.
yeah, and I'll just say also on this policy regarding social media, pretty much this talks about is we will post, but we don't really, the city and our accounts, the city official account does not interact. The only times really the city would interact, and Daniel, you can go into more details, pretty much if it's something that's.
Yeah, so the
I'll let
only
you talk
time,
about that.
yeah, the only time in this policy that we would interact, and I do leave it up to some level of interpretation in case we need to interact with someone or there's something specific, like if somebody, it does happen sometimes where someone will post on social media, be like, my house is burning down. I may then in a post be like, call 911, please. So it sounds silly, but it has happened before. Generally speaking, though, we're not going to respond unless there's something offshoot strange like that, or if it's a specific question about something really technically specific that's like a, hey, just want a clarification on, the date that you wrote there. We make mistakes sometimes. I've put in incorrect dates in posts before, and someone will be like, hey, is that the right date? And I'll be like, that is not the right date. And I'll go in and I'll edit it, and I'll just put a post below it saying, hey, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Put in the wrong date, my bad. And just, that kind of stuff we'll respond to. Generally, if someone just wants to make a comment, we don't make a habit of responding or talking to people, engaging with people online, going back and forth in conversations. That's not generally what we're going to do. And for the most part, because social media is an open forum, it's a public forum. People can say whatever they want so long as they're not harassing, threatening, doing something specific that would be an illegal activity, basically, that I would need to contact Chief Sandell about. We're just going to let people talk and do their own thing.
And going back to kind of what we mentioned back in June when we requested authority to create a Nextdoor, how Nextdoor actually works is we can't see anything. So we can make a post, we can see comments people make on our posts, but anyone in this room who is on Nextdoor and part of a Breezy Point neighborhood, we cannot see anything you post. So.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the communications policy as written.
Second.
Any other discussion?
I think it was written very well, encompassed a lot of items that we talked about, and glad to see it.
And I'm guessing this isn't the only time that we're going to be continuing to have conversations and looking at this policy. I mean, I certainly have a number of ideas that I think would make sense to completely to enhance the policy, but I'm assuming that that's going to come at a,
Oh, absolutely. Again, we're kind of really at the beginning stage of communications, and as we want to hear that feedback from the council, from the public, ways they think it would be better to communicate with people, and whether it's something that needs to be altered, added, removed from the policy, that's kind of again, it's a living document, and we'll make those changes as we need to.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we are at 2 hours. I know that some people have asked that at 2 hours, we take a quick 5-minute recess. So to stand up, stretch, I think now would be the best time.
Recess for
Motion?
five.
Recess for 5.